I came home from 3 years of war in Afghanistan and found my wife standing at the altar in a white dress marrying the man who had been my best friend. Ren stood in front of the whole church smiling like a martyr and told the crowd, when he went missing in Afghanistan 3 years ago he left a hole in Hana's heart. I promised my brother I would fill it, multiple times a week if that's what it takes. I stepped out of the shadows, the dust of a 3-year deployment still on my boots. The collective gasp in the room sucked the air out of the church. Hana looked at me like my survival had ruined her perfect day. I did not swing at him, did not beg her, and did not let them turn me into the unstable, broken veteran they expected. The war didn't take me, Ren, I said smoothly, pulling out my phone to record the panic washing over their faces. But my lawyer is definitely going to take your freedom. I hope you kept the receipts for this wedding because you paid for it with my deployment account. Ren recovered fast. He always did. He spread his arms wide, playing to the pews, that meticulous blonde hair catching the light. Look at him, look at his eyes. His voice cracked with practiced concern. Brother, you're not well. The war did something to you. Nobody blames you. He took one slow step off the platform, closing the distance, lowering his voice just enough for the front rows to strain toward him. Take a swing, get it out of your system. I understood the move immediately. He wanted me to hit him. He wanted the whole town to watch the broken soldier snap so they'd remember the punch instead of the fraud. Security was already shifting near the doors. So I gave him nothing. I kept my hands loose at my sides and my phone steady, the camera still rolling. I didn't blink faster. I didn't raise my voice. 3 years of learning how to stay motionless while the world tried to kill me, and Ren thought a wedding would be the thing to make me flinch. You can stop performing, I said. The camera doesn't care how sincere you sound. That was when Bao stepped in, Hana's father, red already creeping up his neck above his outdated collar. He put a heavy hand near my shoulder, close enough to look paternal, not close enough to be assault. Son, don't do this here. His comb-over trembled. Don't make a spectacle of yourself in front of these people. Walk away with your dignity intact and we can talk like men. Behind him, Gia had already found her cue, pressing a handkerchief to dry eyes, sobbing loud enough to reach the back row. Crying for the audience, not one tear for me. My phone buzzed against my palm, then it buzzed again and again. I turned the screen so Bao could see it because I wanted him to be the first. It was my bank and the alerts were stacking up one after another in real time. A withdrawal, $4,000 straight into Ren's contracting company. A transfer draining out of my deployment allotment account. A pending charge from the very hall we were standing in, nearly $19,000 for the wedding I'd walked in on. My combat pay feeding his business and his ceremony by the second, the account emptying even as we stood there. He hadn't just spent it months ago and moved on. He was spending it right now at his own altar while he called himself my brother. That dignity you mentioned, I said, watching Bao's face go blotchy. It's itemized. Would you like me to read the timestamps out loud, or should we let the bank do that part in court? Bao's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Hana finally spoke from the altar, her voice climbing into that fragile register she used when she needed strangers to protect her. Jin, please, you don't understand. Everyone said you were gone. The military never said that. I didn't look at her. I was already turning. You signed for the notice that said otherwise. I've seen your signature. Her face did something complicated then. I logged it and moved on. I walked toward the front of the church, past the frozen guests, past Ren's slick tuxedo and his watch that I'd apparently financed, and stopped in front of Pastor Choi. The man was sweating through his collar, hazel eyes darting between me and the exits like he was calculating which door was closest. Pastor, every intake form for this ceremony, the marriage license application, the signatures, the ID copies, the deposit records. I kept my tone even, almost gentle, which unsettled him more than shouting would have. You will preserve all of it. You will not shred, edit, or misplace a single page, because in about a week a court is going to ask you whether this marriage was ever legally valid, and your answer is going to depend entirely on those documents. Yes, of course. I'll keep everything. He nodded so hard his wispy hair shook. Everything, I promise. Good. I let the recording run for one more second, capturing the ruin of it, Gia's theatrical weeping, Bao's silent purple face, Hana's white dress, and Ren already spinning toward the crowd to salvage a story that no longer had a spine. Then I stopped recording. I turned off the screen, and I walked out of my own funeral into the afternoon light, boots still gray with a war none of them had bothered to survive. They thought I came home to fall apart. I came home with a plan, and I had an appointment to keep. I didn't go home. Home was a crime scene I hadn't cataloged yet. I drove straight downtown, still in my gear, and walked into a law office with a name on the glass I'd found while I was still overseas, a firm that handled veterans' rights and nothing else. The receptionist looked up at the dust on my boots and the flatness in my face, and to her credit, didn't ask if I was lost. She just picked up the phone and said 4 words into it. He's here, it's him. That was how I knew I'd been expected. The woman who came out to meet me moved like the hallway belonged to her. Red hair perfectly in place, a tailored blazer sharp enough to draw blood, green eyes that took inventory of me in one pass, the boots, the posture, the phone still in my hand, and reached a conclusion she seemed to like. Lynn, she said, you're the wedding. I'm the husband, I said. There's a difference, and I intend to make it legally binding. Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, interest, come back. Her office was all clean lines and closed files. She sat, folded her hands, and told me to give her everything, so I did. I set the phone on her desk and played the recording, Ren's speech, the gasp, the bank alert stacking up over Bao's blotchy face. I watched her watch it. Most people at the part where Ren offers to fill the hole in Hana's heart multiple times a week react, wince, scoff something. Lin just tilted her head and made a note. When it ended, she looked at me for a long moment. Most men who walk in here after something like this are shaking or crying, or they want me to promise I'll destroy the other man. She leaned back. You handed me time-stamped evidence and asked about legal validity. Do you know how rare that is? I know that emotion doesn't survive cross-examination, I said. Facts do. The interest in her eyes sharpened into something warmer, and she let it show, a slow, deliberate look, the kind a woman gives when she's decided a man is worth the trouble. I think, she said, you and I are going to get along dangerously well. We're going to work well, I corrected. My voice didn't change at all. That's the only register I have available. I came home to my best friend in my wife's bed and my name on the paperwork he used to pay for it. Whatever you saw across that desk just now that you liked, it's the same thing that's going to win your case. It doesn't come with anything else attached. I need you to understand that before we begin so it never becomes a conversation later. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she nodded once, professional, and the warmth folded itself away without complaint. Understood, boundaries logged. She pulled a legal pad toward her. Then let's ruin their week. I appreciated that she didn't push. She didn't sulk, didn't turn cold to punish me for the boundary, didn't need me to soften it. She just got to work, and I filed that away too, though I didn't examine why. We moved fast because speed was the only thing on my side. Every hour Ren stayed liquid was an hour he could hide money. First strike, Hana's power of attorney. Somewhere in the fog of me being declared missing, she'd been granted authority to manage my affairs, the mechanism she'd used to drain the deployment account in the first place. Lin drafted the revocation on the spot, notarized it before the ink cooled, and had it filed within the hour. Whatever access Hana thought she had, it died on that desk. Second strike, the joint accounts. Lin submitted an emergency freeze request flagging active fraud, attaching the real-time bank alerts as exhibits. She narrated each line as she typed it, precise and clinical, and I realized she was doing it for my benefit, letting me see every move so I never had to wonder what was happening to my own name. I hadn't asked her to, she'd read that I would need it. Third strike, Captain Lee. Military finance liaison and the only man in this whole affair I actually trusted. Lin put him on speaker. His voice came through clipped and steel gray, and when I laid out the deployment funds feeding Ren's contracting business, there was a pause, then 3 words. That's federal, son. I know, I said. I'll open the file tonight. 2 strikes filed, 1 federal investigation opening, and it wasn't yet dark. Lin told me to go home and collect my military records, the physical file, discharge paperwork, the notices, anything with an official signature. I'd need it all. So finally I went back to the house. I hadn't braced for it because bracing is emotion and emotion doesn't help. But the front room still hit like a slow interrogation. Ren's shoes by my door. Ren's coat on my hook. A photo of the 2 of them on my mantle in a frame I recognized over a fireplace I'd paid for. He hadn't just taken my wife and my money. He'd moved into my life like it was a house he'd been handed the keys to and left everything of mine exactly where it was, like I was the ghost. I didn't break anything, I cataloged. My military file was in the desk, right where the paperwork mattered least to them, which was why they'd left it alone. I pulled it and started sorting, and that was when a page slid out that I did not recognize. Not because I'd forgotten it, because I'd never seen it before in my life. A divorce filing, my name. My signature at the bottom in ink, dated 14 months ago, while I was in a forward operating base with no mail, no courthouse, and no memory of ever signing anything of the kind. I held it up to the light and studied the signature. It was good. It was very good. Someone had traced it carefully. But I'm the one who writes my name, and I know exactly where my hand slows and where it never does. Whoever forged this had gotten everything right except the one thing they couldn't have known. They'd never actually filed it. That was the part that mattered. They'd faked the divorce to clear a path in case anyone asked questions, but the document had never touched a courthouse, which meant Hana was still legally my wife the day she married Ren, and the forgery was just one more felony sitting on top of the fraud. I set it down on the desk, flat and square, and took out my phone. Ren had stolen my money, which was theft. Hana had married another man while I was legally her husband, which was a scandal. Forging a federal signature to erase a soldier who wasn't dead yet, that was a felony with a number, and I was about to hand Lin the charge that would put it there. I photographed the page, sent it to her, and my phone lit up before I'd even lowered it. Lin, where did you get this? Lin, do not touch it again. Do not let it out of your sight. Lin, this changes everything. Lin had the temporary order in her hand by 9 the next morning, and she read it to me in the car like she was reading me my own resurrection. Possession restored to the lawful owner. Occupants to vacate. Any tampering with the property or its contents to be treated as contempt. Her voice stayed flat and clinical the whole way through, but she glanced at me once when she finished, checking to see if the words had landed anywhere soft in me. They hadn't. I don't have anywhere soft, but I let her check. We pulled up to my own house with a locksmith already waiting at the curb and 2 police officers stepping out of a cruiser behind us. I'd requested them not for protection but for witnesses. I wanted uniforms present when this happened, because Ren's entire strategy was built on stories, and stories die fast in front of badges. The locksmith went to work on my front door. I stood on the walk walk I'd paid for and watched him do it still hands loose, the same way I'd stood in the church. Ren and Hana arrived before he was finished. Of course they did. Someone had tipped them and they came screeching up in a car I'd probably also funded, and Ren was out of it before it stopped rolling, blonde hair immaculate, face already twisting into outrage. "What the hell is this? You can't do this. This is breaking and entering. It's my house," I said. "You abandoned it." He rounded on the officers, arms wide, the church performance again. "Officers, this man left. He was gone 3 years. We maintained this property. We paid the—" He caught himself half a second too late. "Paid the what?" Lin asked pleasantly. Ren's mouth closed. Lin stepped forward and did the thing I'd hired her to do. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held up the order and dismantled him in front of the uniforms line by line. Deployment is not abandonment. It's federal service, and there's a statute that says so. A missing in action classification does not transfer property, it freezes it. The occupancy he was claiming as a right was legally the exact opposite. It was trespass the moment I came home, and every day he'd stayed since was another day on a ledger she'd be very happy to itemize for a judge. "You're not the wronged party being evicted," she finished. "You're a squatter being asked to leave before it becomes a second charge. I'd take the ask." The locksmith turned from the door and held out a small ring of new keys. To me, only to me, I took them. The metal was still warm from being cut. I don't perform, so I didn't hold the keys up or make a speech. I just closed my hand around them and I watched Ren watch me do it. Watched the exact moment he understood that the door in front of him no longer opened for him and never would again. That was the whole revenge right there in his face. I didn't need to gloat. His expression did all the work. Hana started crying on the lawn. The fragile version, the one pitched for anyone who might feel sorry for her. One of the officers glanced at her, then away. Even strangers were starting to run out of sympathy for a woman who'd married another man over a living husband. My phone rang, Captain Lee. I answered it standing in my own doorway with Ren still locked out behind me. "Accounts are frozen," Lee said. "All of them, business, personal, the transfers he tried to run this morning bounced." A pause. "His contracting company's lifeline just went dark. Congratulations, son, you've cut the water off." "Understood," I said and hung up and let Ren read that on my face too. They left eventually. They had to. There's nothing to argue with when the keys are already in someone else's hand. That night back at Lin's office, the adrenaline finally caught up with both of us. We were supposed to be prepping the fraud filing. Instead, we were standing too close over the same document, and I became aware, clinically at first, the way I notice everything, that the space between us had stopped being professional some minutes ago and neither of us had corrected it. I'd spent 3 years training myself to feel nothing on command. It's a skill. It kept me alive. But skills have limits, and standing there with the first real taste of justice still hot in my chest, and this woman who had spent 2 days fighting for me without asking for a single thing in return, the discipline I'd built my whole survival around simply thinned. I don't lose composure, but I chose once to set it down. She was close enough now that I could see the exact green of her eyes in the low light of the office, and for once she wasn't reading me like a case file. She'd stopped being my lawyer somewhere in the last few minutes and I'd let her. When she reached up toward me, I didn't catalog the motion or measure the angle of it or wait for the catch. I just let my hand find the side of her face and I kissed her. It was the first thing I'd done in 3 years without a plan behind it. Everything I'd been holding at arm's length for 2 days closed the distance at once. The case files got swept aside, the desk cleared without either of us deciding to clear it, and for a while I stopped being a man running an operation and was just a man. Some things don't belong in a paper trail. Afterward, pulling my shirt back on in the quiet of the office, I felt it come back, the reflex. The wall. The certainty that everyone who gets close eventually uses the closeness against you. My best friend had, my wife had. The 2 people I'd trusted most had turned my trust into the exact weapon that gutted me. So I told her the truth because she deserved it, flat and honest instead of dressed up. "This is all I can give you," I said, working the buttons, not looking at her yet. "The physical, not because of you, because of what's left of me. I don't have trust to offer anyone right now, and I won't lie and say I do just to keep you warm. If that's not enough, tell me now and we go back to only the case." She was quiet for a moment. I braced for the negotiation, the wounded pushback, but it didn't come. "Okay," she said simply, no sulking, no conditions. She was watching me from the edge of the desk, redressing without hurry, green eyes calm and level. "I hear you, I'm not asking for more than you have, I'm just not going anywhere either." I'd expected her to want something back. Everyone wants something back. I filed the fact that she didn't the same way I filed everything and told myself it meant nothing and almost believed it. Then she said one more thing, lighter, already reaching for the folder on the desk. "Get some sleep, because tomorrow your army buddy lands and I think Ren's old bookkeeper wants to talk to us. If she has what I think she has," she smiled, sharp and green, and entirely for me, "they don't just lose. They go to prison." Ken landed the next morning and he took up half my kitchen the moment he walked into it. Broad, stocky, buzz-cut forearms mapped with scar tissue from the same country that had tried to erase me. He didn't hug me because we don't do that. He just looked at me for a long second, taking measure of whether I was still standing, and when he decided I was, he grunted and set a duffel bag on my floor like he was moving in. "Heard you crashed a wedding," he said. "I attended one that was using my money." "Same thing." He cracked his knuckles. "Where do I sign to bury him?" Ken was my anchor, and he knew it without either of us naming it. 3 years ago, he was in the vehicle behind mine when the ambush hit. He was there when the signal went dead and command listed me missing. And this was the part that mattered legally. He was there every single time I tried to get word home. He knew about the letters that never made it. He knew I'd asked repeatedly for someone to tell Hana I was alive, which meant Ken could stand in a courtroom and testify to the one thing Hana's whole defense depended on erasing, that I had tried and that she had been told and that she married Ren anyway. Lynn sat him down that afternoon and walked him through what she'd need. Ken answered every question in short, flat sentences, no embellishment, unbothered by the weight of any of it. She liked him immediately. I could tell because she stopped double-checking his answers halfway through and just let him talk. Between the two of them, we started building what Lynn called the paper graveyard. It was every official document that proved the timeline they were trying to bury. My missing in action notice, my recovery notice, the one confirming I'd been found alive, dated well before the wedding, and buried in the file the receipt page showing that recovery notice had been formally acknowledged. Signed for, by Hana. She'd signed the paper that told her I was alive, then she'd bought a white dress. I set that document at the center of the table and left it there square and flat, the way I'd left the forged divorce filing. Lynn looked at it for a long moment. She knew, she said quietly. This isn't a grieving widow who moved on. This is a woman who confirmed her husband was coming home and decided to marry his money before he could. She tapped the page once. Juries hate that more than the affair. The affair is human. This is calculated. Good, I said. The email came that evening. No name, no signature, just a line. I have Ren's real books. I want to watch him burn. Meet me somewhere he'll never look. Lynn didn't trust it, which is why I kept her. She spent an hour confirming the sender was who the metadata suggested before she agreed to anything, and she picked the meeting place herself, a shut diner on the edge of town, one exit, clear sightlines. She thought about my safety before I did. I noticed that. I was noticing a lot of things I told myself not to weigh. The woman waiting for us in the back booth had messy black hair pinned up with what looked like a pen, dark circles carved under her eyes, and a thick leather folder she kept both hands on top of like it might try to leave without her. She said, I did Ren's books for 2 years. I quit when I realized what he was making me hide. She slid the folder halfway across the table and stopped, not quite letting go. You're the husband, the dead one. The living one, I said. Something in her face eased at that, some private satisfaction. She let go of the folder. I've read a lot of documents in my life. Nothing has ever been more beautiful than what was inside that one. Ledgers. Real ones, the internal set, the numbers Ren actually ran alongside the clean version he showed the bank. And threaded all through them, line after line, was my deployment money rooted in through Hana as an investor, relabeled as capital, spent on the floor plan for his contracting business, and itemized down to the deposit on a wedding at the Grandview event hall. It wasn't a smear of theft anymore. It was a map. He hadn't taken my money in a fog of opportunity. He'd built a laundering structure to do it deliberately, using my wife as the pipe. He knew it was yours, Mai said, watching me read. He used to joke about it, called it his deployment special. Her jaw tightened. I kept copies of everything. I always keep copies. He never once thought the tired woman in the back office was paying attention. Lynn was already photographing pages, fast and methodical, her hands steady while mine, I noticed, had gone completely still around the folder's edge. Not shaking, the opposite. That particular stillness I go into right before something is about to be over. We worked through the night after that. Lynn built the criminal case line by line at her desk, red hair coming loose for the first time since I'd met her. And at some point around 2 in the morning, she set a plate of food beside my hand without a word and slid the trigger paperwork, the kind with graphic ambush details, into a folder before I could reach it. Because she'd learned in 3 days which pages I shouldn't read cold at 2 a.m., she didn't announce that she'd done it. She didn't want credit. She just did it and went back to work. I looked at the food. I looked at her. I'd spent 3 days telling myself she was competent and loyal and nothing more than a very good weapon aimed in the right direction. It was becoming a harder thing to keep telling myself. I didn't say any of that. I ate the food because she'd made a point of it, and I picked up the next page because the case wasn't finished. But I logged it. The one person in this entire wreckage who had my back was the one person who wasn't asking for anything in return. The math on that was starting to bother me in a way theft and forgery never had. The case took on its own weight after that, and the days stopped announcing themselves. A week and a half passed in filings and late nights, the fraud referral working its way through channels, Captain Lee's investigation tightening, the walls closing on Ren one document at a time. Ren made his last stand at a charity dinner which told me everything about how desperate he'd become. His accounts were frozen. His business was gasping. So he did the only thing a man like Ren knows how to do when the money runs out. He reached for the story again, and he picked the most public room in town to tell it in. A ballroom full of the people whose opinion of him was the only currency he had left. Lynn got us on the guest list without much trouble. I wore one of the dark button-downs now instead of the gear, clean lines, nothing wasted. I'd stopped looking like a man returning from a war and started looking like the one who intended to finish this one. We were barely seated when Ren rose, glass in hand, and turned the whole room into an audience. Before we begin, he said, warm and grieving, I want to acknowledge something difficult. Many of you have heard that my brother-in-arms has come home. He found me across the room and aimed a look of pure, practiced compassion at me. Jin, I am so glad you're alive, truly, but I have to be honest with all of you because you deserve the truth. His voice dropped into something confidential, sorrowful. The man who came back isn't the man who left. The war took something from him. He's confused. He's lashing out at the people who loved him most, who grieved him, and I won't defend myself against a wounded soldier. I'll only ask you to pray for him. It was good, I'll give him that. Half the room turned to look at me with soft, pitying faces, already writing the story he wanted, broken veteran, tragic, unwell, not responsible for the accusations he was making. Then Ren went for the trigger. He started describing the ambush. My ambush. Loudly in wet, invented detail, the explosion, the screaming, painting a picture designed to detonate in my chest and drag whatever was left of that day up to the surface in front of everyone. He wanted the flashback. He wanted the town to watch the soldier come apart at the sound of his own war, because a man mid-episode can't press felony charges. He can only be pitied. I picked up my coffee, I drank it. That was all. I sat in my chair with absolute stillness, unaffected, and let him narrate a nightmare that had no power over me anymore because I'd spent 3 years learning to keep my hands steady in the actual version. His counterfeit couldn't touch me. The room noticed the silence where my breakdown was supposed to be. The story needs the soldier to break. The soldier wasn't breaking. The pity started to curdle into confusion. And then Ken stood up. He didn't ask permission. He rose to his full, stocky, scarred height at our table, and every eye in the ballroom went to the man who very clearly had actually been there. I was in the truck behind his, Ken said, flat, loud enough to carry. No performance in it at all, which is exactly why it landed like a hammer. When the vehicle in front of me got hit, I'm the one who called it in. So I know what actually happened over there, and I know what happened back here, and I've had about enough of listening to a man who's never smelled cordite describe it like a bedtime story. Nobody breathed. Jin tried to get word home. I watched him do it. Letters, messages, every channel we had, he tried to tell his wife he was alive. Ken's dark eyes swung slow across the room and landed on Hana, who had gone very pale. And the army did tell her. There's a piece of paper with her signature on it that proves she knew he was coming home. He let that sit. She signed it, then she married him. He turned the eyes on Ren. And you want to talk about the ambush. You never even checked the military registry before you moved into his house and slept in his bed. One phone call and you'd have known he was alive. You didn't make it because you didn't want the answer. The story flipped in real time. I watched it happen across every face in the room, the pity draining out and something colder replacing it, the town rearranging Ren in their minds from grieving brother to something much uglier. Bao shot to his feet, blotchy and sputtering, trying to seize the narrative back. Jia grabbed at people's sleeves, tearful, insisting no one understood. It was all so complicated, poor Hana. But they were bailing water in a boat that was already gone. You could feel the room close against them. Ren stood frozen at his own table, glass still in his hand, watching 3 years of carefully built goodwill evaporate in the space of one honest man's testimony. I hadn't said a single word the entire time. I'd let the truth arrive in someone else's voice and simply watched it work. He caught me outside afterward in the parking lot where he thought the cameras couldn't see. He dropped the grieving act entirely now. The face underneath was the real one, the insecure, cornered thing that had been hiding behind the meticulous hair all along. You think you've won? His voice was low and shaking. You come back from the dead and you think you get to just take everything. I will bury you, I know people. I'll make sure that military record of yours has an incident on it. I'll say you threatened me. I'll say you put your hands on me. Who do you think they'll believe, a decorated, he sneered the word, or a lunatic who crashed a wedding? I let him finish. I let him say all of it. Then I nodded very slightly upward and to my left. Ren's eyes followed the motion. Mounted on the corner of the building, angled directly at us, a security camera with a small red light steady beneath the lens. And a few feet behind me, half in shadow, Lin lowered her phone on which she had been recording every word of it. Witness intimidation, she said, stepping into the light, calm as still water. Threatening to falsify a federal military record. Extortion. She tilted her head. You really should stop talking in places that can hear you, Ren. It's the only skill your situation still requires. The red light kept blinking. Ren's mouth opened, and for once in his life, nothing came out. He just handed us the last piece on record in his own voice. I turned and walked to the car. Behind me, I could hear him breathing fast and ragged, a man who was finally starting to understand that there was no story left to tell. We had his money, we had his forgery, we had his laundering, and now we had his threats. The only thing left to do was put it all on one table in one room and watch the whole structure come down at once. They walked into the mediation still believing they had leverage. That was the last mistake they'd make with their money. It was a bank conference room, all glass and gray carpet, and we'd arranged the table so there was no ambiguity about sides. Lin and I on one, Captain Lee patched in on a screen, uniform pressed, steel gray eyes fixed and patient, 2 bank auditors with laptops open. And across from us, Ren, Hana, and 2 lawyers who already had the specific tightness around the eyes of men who suspected they'd been retained too late. Ren tried to open strong. He always led with confidence because confidence was all he'd ever really had. I think we can all be reasonable here, he said, spreading his hands. There were some accounting irregularities during a chaotic time. Nobody's saying it was handled perfectly. But I'm prepared to be generous about a settlement that lets everyone. Lin set the folder on the table. She didn't slam it. She placed it gently, the way you set down something heavy you've been carrying a long way. Then she opened it and began to walk through it, page by page, in a voice with no heat in it at all. She started with the deployment account. This dollar on this date withdrawn under Hana's power of attorney. She traced it into Ren's business as an investment from an outside investor. She turned the page and showed the same dollar spent on his floor plan. She turned another and showed its twin paying the deposit at the Grandview event hall. Then she did it again. And again, line by line, she laid my stolen life across the table in a sequence so clean that the room went from tense to silent to something like funereal. The bank auditors stopped taking notes at a certain point and just watched. One of them slid the ledger toward himself, read for 30 seconds, and murmured something to the other. When he looked up, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Ren, and his voice was flat and final. This isn't a civil matter. This is structured fraud. The bank is opening a formal inquiry as of this meeting and will be referring it. Ren's own lawyer set his pen down. That was the moment it truly ended, not when the auditor spoke, but when the man Ren was paying to defend him quietly stopped writing. And then Ren did the thing that men like him always do when the floor opens under them. He reached for someone to push down first. He turned on Hana. This was her, he said, loud, pointing. She's the one who had the access. She's the one who moved the money. She told me it was hers. She told me it was a settlement. I didn't know where any of it came from. I trusted her. Hana's head snapped toward him. I watched it happen on her face in real time, and I'll admit it was the only genuinely interesting thing that happened all afternoon. The delicate, wide-eyed manipulation she wore like a second skin simply fell off. Underneath it was a woman doing arithmetic, realizing, right there at the table, that the man she'd burned her life down for had never seen her as a partner at all. She'd been the pipe. The pretty, useful pipe that moved another man's money into his account. And now that the money was gone, the pipe had a name and a signature on all the incriminating documents, and he was already climbing over her to reach the door. You said, her voice cracked. You said we were building something. You said, I said whatever I had to, Ren snapped, and then caught himself a half-second too late, and the whole room heard the shape of the confession inside it. Lee's voice came through the screen, dry as bone. Please keep going. They didn't keep going. Their lawyers finally earned their fees by shutting both of them up, but it was far too late. The auditors had heard enough, the ledgers were already photographed, and the inquiry was already a living thing. Hana found me outside on the courthouse steps after. I was waiting for Lin to finish with the auditors. Hana came down the steps toward me alone. Ren had left without her, which told her everything she should have understood months ago. Her makeup was ruined. The frantic, unkempt look the story had been building toward all along had finally arrived on her in full. Jin. She was crying, and for once I couldn't tell how much of it was performance and how much was real, and I found that I no longer cared to measure. Jin, please, I was tricked too. He used me, you heard him. He used me the same as he used you. We're the same in this. Can't we? She reached for my sleeve. Can't we just settle this quietly for what we used to be? I looked at her hand on my sleeve until she took it back. You want me to believe you were tricked, I said. My voice was level. There was nothing in it for her. Ren was tricked into nothing. He built the machine on purpose. But you signed the notice that told you I was alive. You read the words, you understood them, and then you put on a white dress. I let that sit between us. That's the difference between you and me being the same. He got greedy and lied. You got the truth in writing, held it in your own two hands, and chose. It's the difference between being tricked and being responsible. He's the first. You're the second. Don't ever confuse them again. Jin, goodbye, Hana. I turned and walked up the steps, and I didn't look back, and I heard her sit down on the stone behind me and start to sob for real this time, not for an audience because there wasn't one left. Just for herself and for the life she'd traded a living husband to get, which was now going to arrive with a case number attached. Lin was waiting at the top of the steps. She'd seen the whole thing. She didn't say anything about it. She just fell into step beside me, matching my pace, and after a moment she said quietly, you didn't gloat. There was nothing to gloat about, I said. It was just true. She glanced at me sideways, something in her green eyes I was getting worse and worse at pretending not to see. That, she said, is exactly why it worked. Cornered men get honest about what they are. Ren and Bao spent this stretch proving exactly what they were. The bribe came first and they aimed it at Ken, which showed how little they understood the man. Someone approached him in a bar near his motel, not Ren himself. Ren was too careful for that now, but a go-between with an envelope and a suggestion that Ken's memory of the ambush and the letters home might be fuzzier than he'd made it sound, and that a fuzzy memory could be worth a great deal to a man just passing through town. Ken let him finish the whole pitch. Then he took out his phone, showed the man that it had been recording since Can I Buy You a Drink, and told him to go tell whoever sent him that the offer had been logged, timestamped, and forwarded to a lawyer with red hair who was going to enjoy it very much. He was right about that. Lin did enjoy it, but bribery failing only made them more desperate, and desperate was when Bao decided to reach for the one thing he thought could still hurt me, my record. They filed a false assault claim. Ren swore a statement that I'd put my hands on him, that I'd cornered him in the charity dinner parking lot and threatened him, attacked him, that he'd feared for his life from an unstable veteran. Bao lent it his weight, his standing, his outdated wealthy patriarch gravity, cautioning the lie in an affidavit. The plan was transparent and in its way clever: get an assault allegation onto my military record, reframe me as exactly the dangerous, broken soldier Ren had been selling from the start, and use it to muddy every other charge. A man with a violent incident on his file is a less sympathetic victim of fraud. It would have been a real problem if it were true and if there weren't a camera. There was a camera. I have watched Lynn work for 2 weeks now, and I had thought I'd seen the full range of her. I'd seen the strategist. I hadn't yet seen what happened when someone tried to hurt me specifically, rather than merely lose to me. She went scorched earth. She didn't shout "Lynn never shouts" the way I never swing. She simply arrived at the opposing counsel's office with a thumb drive and a list, and she laid the whole thing out with a coldness that made even their lawyers go quiet. The parking lot footage, which showed me standing perfectly still while Ren advanced on me, threatening to falsify my record. Her own audio recording of every word of that threat. The time-stamped log of Ren's bribery attempt on Ken. And stacked on top, the statute citations for each new felony they had just cheerfully committed by filing the false report. "Let me tell you what you've actually done," she said, and I was in the room for this, and I will remember the temperature of her voice for a long time. "You didn't file an assault claim. You manufactured a false statement to a federal authority, which is one charge. You did it to tamper with a witness and corrupt a military record, which is 2 more. And your client," she looked at Bao, whose face had gone from red to a sick blotchy gray, cautioned all of it under oath, which means when this collapses, and it will collapse today, he goes down for perjury alongside his son-in-law. She set the drive on the desk. "You have until the end of the day to withdraw the claim and put the withdrawal in writing. After that, I stop offering the mercy of a deadline and start filing. Do not test whether I'm bluffing. Ask anyone in this county whether I bluff." They withdrew it by 4 o'clock. Bao's affidavit was retracted with a shaking hand. The whole clumsy attack folded in on itself in a single afternoon and left them worse off than before they'd tried it, because now the file had one more crime in it, theirs. I watched her do all of that, and something in me that had been welded shut for 3 years quietly came apart. I need to be precise about this because it matters. I did not fall for Lynn because she was beautiful, though she was, or because we'd been sleeping together, because I'd walled that off as a physical fact and nothing more. I fell for her in that office, watching her stand between me and a lie with her whole considerable self, furious on my behalf and asking for absolutely nothing in return. That was the thing I couldn't process. She wasn't defending me to be owed. There was no ledger. She'd made it clear from the first night that she expected nothing back, and she'd meant it. She'd kept meaning it for 2 weeks, while feeding me and shielding me from my own trigger pages and going to war for my name, all of it freely. None of it invoiced. Ren and Hana had spent years teaching me that closeness was just a weapon that hadn't been used yet, that everyone who got near me was quietly calculating what I was worth to them. They'd made that lesson feel like law, and Lynn was standing there being the entire disproof of it. That night back at her office, she was pulling her hair loose from the day and reaching for the case files again, already moving to the next thing when I said her name. She looked up. I don't make speeches, so I didn't. I just said the true thing, flat and plain, the only register I have. "You never asked for anything," I said. "I kept waiting for the price. There wasn't one." She went still. She understood immediately that this wasn't about the case. "I told you at the start that all I had was the physical," I said. "That wasn't a boundary, it was a wall. I built it because the last 2 people I trusted used my trust to gut me, and I decided I'd never hand anyone the knife again." I held her eyes. "You've had the knife for 2 weeks. You keep using it to fight for me. I don't have a category for that, except the honest one." "And what's the honest one?" she said quietly. "That the wall's coming down." I didn't look away. "That I trust you. That it stopped being just physical for me somewhere around the ledgers, and I've been logging it as data because I was too much of a coward to log it as what it was." The green eyes softened, not the professional softening she let me see on the first day, the real one, the one she'd been holding in reserve this whole time. She crossed the room. She didn't say "finally" or "I told you so" or make me pay for the 2 weeks it took. She just came to me and I let her, and for the first time since I'd walked out of that church, I wasn't standing perfectly still because I was guarding against something. I was still because I was, at last, exactly where I meant to be. The physical-only line was never spoken again by either of us. It didn't need a funeral. It just quietly stopped being true. The last room was a courtroom, and this time I didn't need anyone else to speak for me. The evidence spoke, and it had a lot to say. I sat beside Lynn at the prosecution's side while Captain Lee walked the court through a case so complete it left no seams to work at. He'd spent weeks turning what Lynn and I built into a federal instrument, and now he laid it out piece by piece in that flat steel gray voice that made juries lean forward. The forged divorce filing came first. My signature traced by a hand that didn't know where mine slows and where it never does, dated to a month I was on a forward operating base with no courthouse for 400 miles. Then the recovery notice with Hana's own signature on the receipt, proving she'd held the truth of my survival in her hands before she bought the dress. Then Mai's ledgers, projected on the wall large enough for every juror to follow the single dollar as it left my deployment account, passed through Hana, and became the floor plan of Ren's business and the deposit on his wedding. Mai testified in person, thin-rimmed glasses catching the light, exhausted and precise, and she never once looked at Ren while she buried him. Ken testified in his dress blues. Ren's own withdrawn assault claim was entered as evidence of consciousness of guilt. The bribery recording played through the courtroom speakers in Ren's go-between's own words. Ren's lawyers had nothing to stand on because there was no floor left. You cannot cross-examine a paper trail. It doesn't get nervous. It doesn't contradict itself. It simply sits there and is true over and over until the truth is the only thing in the room. I watched the arrogance leave Ren by degrees across those days. It didn't shatter all at once, it eroded notice by notice, ledger by ledger, until the man who'd spread his arms in that church was just a pale figure at a table watching his own handwriting convict him. When the verdict came, I did not brace because I no longer needed to. Guilty, grand theft, military fraud, forgery, every count. The judge was not merciful and there was no reason to be. Ren and Hana were each sentenced to 10 years. A decade, absolute. They took Ren out first. Whatever performance he'd been saving for this moment failed to arrive. The facade had already burned down to nothing, and what walked out between the bailiffs was just a small, cornered man who'd finally run out of stories. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. Hana looked. As they led her out, she turned her head and found me across the courtroom, one last time, her doe eyes wide and wet and searching for something in my face, some flicker, some crack, some sign that a piece of the man she'd married still belonged to her. I didn't give it to her, not out of cruelty. There was simply nothing there for her to find. My eyes were already somewhere else. They were on Lynn. Months passed and the house stopped being a crime scene and became a home. I had every trace of them stripped out, the photos, the coat hook, the frame over the fireplace I'd paid for. I repainted, I replaced. I let the place become mine again, and then ours, until you couldn't stand in a single room of it and feel the ghost of what Ren and Hana had done there. The past didn't haunt the house anymore. I'd audited it out line by line the same way I'd taken back everything else. I was healed. Not in the way people mean when they say it gently. I mean the wall was gone, actually gone, and I'd stopped waiting for the price on every kind thing that came near me. Lynn taught me that. She never made it a lesson. She just kept showing up without an invoice until I believed it. She was standing in the middle of our reclaimed living room on a quiet evening, late light coming gold through windows. I'd rehung myself, red hair catching it, and I looked at her and understood with total clarity that the calculating, razor-sharp woman who dressed like a weapon had spent the worst season of my life being the only thing in it that never once turned against me. You asked me once what the honest category was, I said. She turned. I remember. I've got a more honest one now. I crossed the room and I did the one thing 3 years of war and one act of betrayal had convinced me I would never do again. I dropped to one knee. Her hand came up to her mouth. The observant green eyes that cataloged everything, that never missed a detail, went wide and unguarded, and for once she was the one who couldn't process what was in front of her. You had the knife the whole time, I said, looking up at her. You never used it on me, not once. You taught a man who decided trust was a weakness that it could be the strongest thing he owned. My voice didn't shake because I meant every word too completely to be nervous about it. I don't have anything left to guard, so I'm giving all of it to you. Marry me? She didn't make me wait the way she'd never made me wait for anything. Yes. She was laughing and crying at the same time, which I'd never seen her do, this woman who commanded every room she walked into, now completely undone in the middle of ours. Yes, you impossible stoic, finally, yes. I stood and I gave her the thing I'd reserved for no one in 3 years, the thing I'd never given Ren or Hana or a single enemy across a single table. I smiled. A real one meant entirely for her. And then I kissed her in the middle of the home I'd fought a whole war of paper and patience to win back, with the last of the gold light coming through the windows and the ghosts gone and the ledger finally completely balanced. I came home from 3 years of war and lost everything at an altar. I stood at a better one and got my whole life back.